Hi everybody, welcome to E-Content Development Center, Majlis Arts and Science College. I am Ajay Kumar, Assistant Professor, PG Department of Computer Science, Majlis Arts and Science College, Puramannur. In this session, I am going to take the topic IP address, which is a part of network course of 6th semester BC and BSc Computer Science program of University of Calicut. In these sessions, I am going to take the topic what is IP address, different versions of IP address, different types of IP address. After this session, you will get an idea about what is IP address, IP version 4, IP version 6 details, different classes of IP version 4, what is the difference between IP version 4 and IP version 6. First of all, we can go to our topic, what is IP address. Actually, what is IP address? IP address is mainly used for the purpose of identifying a device on the network. IP address is a unique identifier of a device in the network. IP address is globally managed by IANA, that means Internet Assigned Number Authority, and RIA, Regional Internet Registries. There are two types of IP addresses. One is static IP address and other is dynamic IP address. First, we are going to discuss what is static IP address. Static IP address is a permanent address that is assigned to a computer system. When a static IP is given to a computer system, that IP will not be changed. This IP address is mainly used by the servers in the internet. The next one is dynamic IP address. Dynamic IP address is a temporary in nature, which is assigned for a short period of time, which is mainly provided by dynamic host configuration protocol servers. You will get an IP address from the internet service provider, which is provided by internet service providers dynamic host configuration protocol server. Now we can discuss different versions of IP address. There are two versions of IP address. One is IP version 4 and IP version 6. IP version 4 is represented in 32-bit and IP version 6 is represented by 128-bit. Now we can discuss the two versions, IP version 4 and IP version 6 in detail. Now I am going to discuss the IP version 4. IP version 4 is 32-bit number. This number is divided into 4 parts. Each part is known as octet. Each octet contains 8 bits and it is divided by dot. IP version 4 address is given by dotted decimal notation or dotted binary notations. Now IP address 4 has two parts. One is network part and host part. That means net ID and host ID. On the basis of this net ID or host ID, IP version 4 is divided into 5 classes. We can discuss each class in detail. First, I am going to discuss class A. In class A IP address, first octet is used for net ID and last 3 octets are used for host ID. That means 8 bit is used for net ID and 24 bits is used for host ID. The range of class A IP address is 1 to 126. 127 is also a part of class A IP address, which is not used for in giving any IP address because it is a loopback address. Next, class B. In class B, first two octets are used for net ID and last two octets are used for host ID. That means 16 bits are used for net ID and 16 bits are used for host ID. The range of IP address used in class B are 128.0.0.0 to 191.255.255.255. Next, class C. In class C, first three octets are used for net ID and last octet is used for host ID. That means 24 bits are used for net ID and last one octet, that means 8 bits are used for host ID. The range of IP addresses used in class C are 192.0.0.2, 130, 223.255.255.255. The next two IP addresses, that is class E and class D, which is not assigned to any computer. One is multicast address and other class E address is used for future enhancement purposes or research purposes. Class D IP address is mainly used for multicasting. Multicasting means sending messages to more than one receivers. That is called multicasting. So the multicasting address, that is ranged from 224 to 239 is used for multicasting. The next one is class E address, which is mainly used for research purposes. The range is 240 to 255. There are two types of IP addresses. One is private IP and public IP. Public IP is mainly used in internet and private IP is used in local area networks. The IANA give a group of IP addresses for private usages. In class A, the 10.0.0 to 10.255 ranges are used for class A private IP. Class B private IP is start from 172.16.00 to 172.31.255.255. Class C private IP is 192.168.0.0 to 192.168.255.255. IP version 6 is 128-bit address, which is divided into 8 parts. Each part contains 2 bytes. The address is represented by hexadecimal column notation. The next I am going to discuss the structure of IP address. The IP address is divided into mainly 2 parts. One is upper 64 part and lower 64 part. The lower 64 part is used to identify the host part, that is used to identify the node. The upper 64 part is again divided into 2. One is subnet ID and other is global unicast address. IP version 6 have 3 major categories. One is unicast address, other is multicast address, and third one is unicast address. Unicast means one-to-one communication, one sender and one receiver. In multicast address, one sender and many receivers. Unicast address also one sender and many receivers. IP version 6 contains, we already discussed that IP version 6 contains 3 categories of IP address. We can again divide these categories into subcategories. IP version first, unicast addresses can be divided into global unicast address, link local address, loopback address, unspecified address, unique local address, and embedded IPv4. First, we are going to discuss unicast address. Unicast address, we already said that different subcategories. First category is global unicast address, which is equal to the public IP of IP version 4. The next one is link local unicast address. Link local unicast address is also same as private IP of IP version 4. Another one is unique local address is also a private IP address, which is some slight difference between link local unicast address. Link local unicast address used only in one subnet, but unique local addresses can use multiple subnets. And the next one is loopback address. Loopback address is mainly used to send packets to itself, which is same as 127.0.1 address of IP version 4. Next one is IPv4 embedded address. IPv4 embedded address is mainly used to convert IPv4 address to IPv6 address. Next, I am going to discuss multicast address. Multicast address is used to send a message to a group. There are 3 types of multicast address. One is well-known multicast address, solicited node multicast address, transient multicast address. Well-known multicast address is mainly used for reserved purposes. The next one is solicited node multicast address, which is created automatically from unicast address. The next one is transient multicast address, which is created by application programs. The next one is Unicast address. Unicast address is same as multicast address, but the difference is the packet is sent to the nearest interface. That means in Unicast address the packet is sent to its nearest interfaces, but in case of multicast address they send packets to different nodes. Next, I am going to discuss the difference between IP version 4 and IP version 6. The first difference is IP version 4 is 32-bit address, IP version 6 is 128-bit address. The next difference is IP version 6 is based on alphanumeric, IP version 4 is numeric address. The next one is IP version 6 address is separated by column notation. IP version 4 address is separated by dot operator. The next one is IP security is must for IP version 6, but IP security is optional in IP version 4. The next one is configured. Networks can be automatically configured in IP version 6, but manual configuration is needed in IP version 4. I think you will get an idea about IP version 6 and 4. We will meet again with another topic.